Thank you, Madam Speaker. And today I rise in strong opposition of Senate Bill 3167. In the last 2 years, I've served as the ranking member of the Census Subcommittee here in the House. We've had no legislative hearing, no markup, no substantive discussions about the contents of this legislation. And here we are at the last hour of a lame duck Congress, and they're trying to pass a piece of legislation that hasn't had a honest-to-goodness legislative hearing or a markup. Well, I guess that's what we've seen over the last 24 months out of this Congress, is a disregard for the legislative process. I don't think it's responsible for us to pass a major piece of legislation like this, and it does have a major impact. And I certainly appreciate my colleague submitting ideas such as this to improve the census, but I don't think this is the right approach. And to that end, I ask unanimous consent to submit to for the record a letter from the Department of Commerce signed by Secretary Gary Locke, dated December 13th, stating his opposition to components of this legislation.
Without objection.
Thank you. I think it's important that we shouldn't reward the Census Bureau for a repeated history of cost overruns and mishaps. These suggest that the Bureau needs more, not less, oversight. Senate Bill 3167 would grant greater autonomy to the Census Director. The bill would have the Director bypass the Commerce Undersecretary for Economic and Statistics Administration, ESA, in favor of a direct report to the Commerce Secretary. Each Commerce Secretary has opposed this proposal. In fact, the current Commerce Secretary has 16 direct reports, and so this further puts in place a process that I don't think is sustainable for this Commerce Secretary or future Commerce Secretaries. Yesterday, the current Commerce Secretary, Gary Locke, wrote a letter to Congress stating the Department, quote, strongly opposes the provisions of this bill enabling the Census Bureau Director to submit legislative recommendations or testimony to Congress without supervisory review. This letter also expresses concern about the provisions of the bill that would require the Director of the Census Bureau to report directly to the Secretary of Commerce. With regard to these views, it is worth pointing out that it is the Commerce Secretary himself who has granted the statutory authority to carry out the decennial census. The Census Bureau will have less oversight if it reports directly to the Secretary, as I've stated before, because the Secretary has 16 direct reports. The Census Director currently reports to the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs, who heads ESA. It is the role of ESA to coordinate economic data, some of which is provided to the Census Bureau's Economic Directorate. Granting the Census Bureau autonomy from ESA will hinder the coordination of economic data. And certainly we are a world leader in terms of our regard for economic data. The Census Bureau wants to operate as independently as possible. That certainly is understandable. But it's also important to recognize a history of cost overruns that the Bureau has had under Democrat and Republican administrations. And the GAO has put the 2010 census in its high-risk list due to concerns of mismanagement within the Census Bureau. And again, that was a bipartisan problem. Congress should not reward fiscal irresponsibility by granting additional autonomy. Madam Speaker, this bill does not establish accountability. It does not require the Census Bureau to have an Inspector General, which I think would be proper. It does not establish fiscal constraints. It doesn't even provide guidelines on the questions and surveys that it can ask the American people. And it doesn't require the Bureau to produce alternative methods of procuring statistical data, such as partnerships with universities and the private sector, which I think is necessary and proper in this time that we're in. Madam Speaker, consideration of this bill is premature. The 2010 census results will be released 1 week from today. The Bureau just announced that yesterday. But crucial information concerning the statistical confidence level of the data will not be released until early next year. Again, this bill is premature. I certainly appreciate my colleagues' interest in this, but I think it is better handled in the next Congress, where we can actually have an honest-to-goodness, I don't know, legislative hearing perhaps, maybe even a markup of a bill, and actually get some input from both sides. Just because the Senate passed it doesn't mean the House should rubber stamp it by any means. But I do think we should have serious consideration of this bill and do it under the light of day, not at the 11th hour of a dying Congress. So that's my view, and I think that's the view of many colleagues on my side of the aisle as well, and I retain the balance of my time.